Welcome back to F1 Brake Check, all you little speed freaks. After a 2-week hiatus, we are back in action in time to get you ready for the Formula One teams to get back in action. On today's episode, we will have the exciting return of our Tech Corner, and we'll talk about the latest news, car reveals, and start the countdown to preseason testing. So settle in with your favorite drink and a bag of crisps, because F1 Brake Check is coming at you at full chat.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
Welcome back to F1 Brake Check. My name is Scott Vick. I am one of your intrepid hosts, and with me as always is my pundit for life, my ride or die, my brother in arms, Mr. Corey Broom. Corey, how you doing today, sir?
Good. So last week I was in Minnesota, and me and a friend, we actually got to play some pond hockey. So when I say hockey, it's really just me and him passing the puck back and forth and shooting at a goalie-less net. But it was a pond, it was in Minnesota, and we had skates and a puck and sticks. So
that is awesome.
in 3 degree Fahrenheit, which is what, negative 17 or so Celsius. Cold, but as you start going, we were sweating, so it was good, man. It was a good time.
That is fantastic.
How was Las Vegas?
Vegas was good. At least was as much as you can say Vegas. Much like the Vegas Grand Prix, I am not a fan of either the Grand Prix or the city of Vegas itself. It's just really not my cup of tea, but the conference itself was fantastic. Got to meet a bunch of great folks. Got to meet some fellow F1 fans and everything who are all, super, pumped to take and talk all things Formula One and getting excited about the upcoming season. So it was really good. And also learned a ton of new stuff for next year.
That is perfect, man. Very excited about that. Very cool.
So yeah, it was a fantastic week.
Nice.
All right. So, like I said at the intro, this week we have the return of our Tech Corner in lieu of a biography or a history lesson. So, Corey, I have a question for you. When is a Ferrari not a Ferrari?
When Charles Leclerc isn't driving.
I like that answer, but that is not correct.
It's not true.
Yes, that is not true. So, when a Ferrari is not a Ferrari is when it's carrying the red, white, and black colors of a Haas. And I'll tell you the reason why. Have you ever heard of the transferable components rule in Formula One?
No.
Okay. So, a couple of years back, in order to stop what was being referred to as the copycat rules of allowing teams to basically take and do full-on copies or being able to buy entire chassis or entire structures of the car, the FIA and Formula One took and created a set of rules. And so there are different classifications of parts that are and they make up the cars, and those parts fall into different categories. So there is the listed component, there is the transferable components, there is the standard supply components, and then there's the open source components. And so real quickly, we're going to I'll explain what each one of the components is, and then we'll get deeper into primarily into the transferable components for today. So the listed components are parts that have to be designed and built by each individual F1 teams, which means that you can't, have a third party come in and design it and build it for you. These are things like the survival cell and the roll hoop, the front impact structure, the fuel bladder, anything like that. Then you have the what are called the standard supply components. So these are things that are mandated by the FIA and by Formula One, and these are components that only have a single supplier that the teams can buy them from. So currently, that includes things like the wheel covers. Now, as we talked a couple weeks ago, there's a change for 2026 that the wheel covers, that the teams can now start designing their own wheel covers as well, as long as they fit within a certain parameter of rules. But it also includes things like the wheel rims, the tire pressure sensors, the tires, of course, because all tires have to come from Pirelli, the car to team telemetry. But there are some caveats to that because not the teams have to buy and I said originally, I said at the top that it was only from a single supplier. There are some things like the telemetry and the radios and things like that, that there's actually a couple of different suppliers, but the teams have to buy their stuff as off the shelf components from those suppliers. Now they can customize those components once they have them, but again, like I said, just like the ECU for the engines, the electronic control units all have to be purchased from a single supplier. But now the teams can also add additional modules to the ECUs to take and do additional telemetry gathering, engine mapping, things like that, because the engine mapping for a Ferrari is going to be different than the engine mapping for, like, say, a Mercedes. And so the engine manufacturers can take and add additional modules to the ECU that allows them to,
Right. Makes sense.
to customize it for their particular power unit. And then there are what are called open source components, which is just like open source software. These are designs that are free and available for any of the teams to use. And these are things like the steering columns, steering wheels, and the quick release for that allows them to remove the steering wheel, the brake master cylinder, the drink system, anything like that. Now they still have to be built by the teams, but the design and the way that they work, any software that's involved with them and stuff, those are all open source and are available to any of the teams who want to use them. And there can be multiple different, just like any kind of open source project, there can be multiple versions that do basically the same thing, but they each have their own little, what's the word I'm looking for here? Their own different, variety to it or whatever, or differentiators on them. So then the last part is what are called the transferable components. Now, these are the parts that one team can design and build, and then they can actually sell them to other teams. So in the case of Haas, like I was saying, is basically, beyond the front crash structure, the side pods, some of the cooling layout, parts and stuff like the radiators and things like that. Almost all the other parts on a Haas right now are actually being designed and built by Ferrari, and then Haas purchases them from Ferrari. So Haas already uses, everybody already knows that Haas uses Ferrari power units, but they also use the Ferrari gearbox, the Ferrari clutch, all of the gearbox internals, all of the external components to the gearbox, like the oil system, reverse gear, the front suspension, the power assisted steering, the secondary heat exchangers, all of the pipes for the cooling and everything. So all of this whole long list, and even the electrical loom is purchased from Ferrari and put into the Haas. So it's like beyond just like the basic structure of the car, everything else on a Haas is actually is bought and designed by Ferrari. Wow. Now, the one caveat to that is unlike the power units, which we talked about a few, podcasts ago, where the power units all have to, in a given year, that are provided by the manufacturer, so Ferrari, Mercedes, unlike those, which all have to be the same exact spec in order to create a level playing field, all of the transferable components don't necessarily have to be the same specs. So the rear suspension that Haas is buying from Ferrari may not necessarily be the exact same suspension that Ferrari has on their car right now. So if Ferrari brings an upgrade, the one that Haas is using may be one or two generations older. Same thing with the gearbox. So the gearbox, if Ferrari makes a change to the gearbox, to the internals or anything like that, they don't necessarily have to sell that exact same spec to Haas right away. So the one that Haas is getting may be, a generation or two older than the one that Ferrari is currently has, fitted to their car. And some people have said, well, this takes, and of course it's going to take and put a team like Haas at a disadvantage to, so you're never going to probably, unless something really, really weird happens, where like Ferrari gets the setup completely wrong, or
Yeah.
they have, they get caught out, in a, as we've seen before in the past where, they don't get a lap time in before it starts raining. And then all the subsequent running in qualifying is done in the wet. So it's considerably slower.
Or they
And
use the
so
wrong
Ferrari ends
tire.
up further back in the field.
Yeah.
That's the only time you're ever going to see a Haas
Yeah.
out qualify or out, perform a Ferrari is only in those weird situations because the car is always going to have a slight disadvantage over, over the mothership, if you will,
Yeah.
in Ferrari. Now, we're talking about Haas in the fact that they are purchasing everything that is allowable under the transferable components rule from Ferrari for their car. They're not the only team that does that, though. Williams, who is a Mercedes customer, is also using the Mercedes gearbox as well. They're purchasing the gearboxes from Mercedes, which is different though from McLaren, who is also a Mercedes customer, but Mercedes builds their own gearbox and their own gearbox internals, and all the auxiliary components and everything are
Right.
all manufactured by McLaren, so that way they can get the absolute best performance for their car by designing and creating all of these components. But there are a number of the teams that are further back in the midfield or the back of the pack that are purchasing these components from some of the other teams. There's actually Williams actually once upon a time took and developed a lot of their own electronics and
Yeah.
everything, and they actually sold some of those electronic components that were allowed underneath the transferable components rule to other teams. So so this is something that's has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
But it was only, I think it was 2005 or 2006. I don't have the number right in front of me, but that's when they took and they made the change to the rules, that took and started, forcing some of these, the teams to actually have to create more of their car to be true quote unquote constructors.
Because I always had the impression that if you bought the power units, that all the other stuff would come with it, all the gearboxes and everything like that.
It may only be two specs, which,
Okay.
as we've seen, the incredible advancement,
Yep.
so like Ferrari brings an upgrade to the rear suspension for like, say, 6 races into the season,
Yeah.
but the one that they're selling to Haas may be the one that, either the one that they started the season with,
Right.
or it may be like the one that they ran at Abu Dhabi at the closing race
Yeah.
of last season.
Right.
So
Gotcha. Okay. So
it may
two
only be one or
specs.
two
Gotcha.
specs
Pretty
older,
much.
but
Is it just McLaren that designed their own?
no, all of so like all of your front runners, so Ferrari, Williams, Red Bull, it's like Red Bull, of course they're run Honda,
Mhm.
power units, even though right now they're technically rebadged as Red Bull power
Right.
units. But they took and even when it was Honda, they took and they built and designed their own gearboxes, all of the cooling layout, and it's the same thing with now. That's another case where Racing Bulls, they do take and they share some of the component design with Red Bull, but they still actually produce and manufacture most of the components on their own car. Now, there are some parts that, yes, they do take from, the Red Bull team, that they're purchasing those parts, and it's, and just because, and that's not just the power unit manufacturers that are selling components to other teams.
Mhm.
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there are parts that McLaren design and build themselves that they're actually selling to some of the lower tier teams as well. They're not the sole, Mercedes and Ferrari don't have the sole, market on selling components to other teams and things like that. So there are, there's always been kind of a for lack of a better term, incestual
Yeah.
agreements among the teams, where they may, just say, okay, we don't have the expertise, or you're able to do something that way better than what we currently have the capability to do, so we're going to get, some of our components from other places, from other teams in order to field the best car that we can. But most of the front runners, so like, so Mercedes, Red Bull, um,
McLaren.
Ferrari,
Yeah.
and McLaren, they all produce every component on their car outside of the power unit itself. So, and, that they can. I mean, like I said, there are the single, standard supply pieces that they have to buy from, one of the approved
Yeah.
suppliers, for things like the wheel covers and the wheel rims and the tires and the TPMS sensors and things like that. Those parts, they all, of course they have, but a lot of those parts are actually, they take and they have ways of, there's also additional rules around what they're allowed to modify, how they can
Makes
modify
sense.
it, what
Yeah.
they can do with it, and things like that.
Right.
So, like for example, like the driver radios, they're not allowed to modify them, by adding like things like because once upon a time, all the radio communications between the pit wall and the driver were encrypted because they
Right.
didn't want the other teams
Yeah,
to
of
be able to
course. Yeah.
listen in. And the FIA couldn't listen in, so if
Right.
they were giving the drivers, instructions and things like that,
Yeah.
and a few years ago, I remember there was a big kerfuffle about team orders and things
Mm.
like that. And because they were doing it through encrypted channels, the FIA couldn't prove that they were doing it. So that's when they came out with
Sure.
the rule that said you cannot have, they went from one extreme to the absolute
Right.
opposite, where they
Right.
said you're not allowed to give any team orders. And
Right.
the teams basically went, no, we're still going to do that, but we'll be a little more transparent and we'll
Got it.
stop encrypting our, radio transmissions and stuff. And so that's the reason why they have to buy an off the shelf radio
Mm.
system, for their usage,
Yeah.
for their communications and everything, so that way, they can't really modify any of the components, so that way, the FIA and the stewards can talk to them and things like that. So that's the reason why those standard components are there. But then, like I said, also with kind of didn't plan on talking about this, but you also have like I said, the open source components
Hmm.
where it's a list of components that the teams can take, and they can put on a server that is designated by the FIA, like GitHub or anything else like that, where certain components can be, specced out and designed and everything, but
Wow.
they are freely available for any of
That's
the other
awesome.
teams
Very
to
cool.
take
Yeah.
and use, so which is really kind of a cool thing,
Yeah.
that the fact that, those certain things, like I was saying, like the brakes master cylinders, if somebody has a really superior design and it's open source, then like say for if McLaren has a really superior design because they make some huge, breakthrough on the design of the brake master cylinder, the other teams can say, oh, okay, that's a really cool design, so we're going
Yeah.
to build one from their specs. A lot
Yeah.
of these components that are listed in the open source components list, a lot of these things are stuff that I don't really see that, because they've been around for so many decades, that trying to find, any kind of, advantage in those components, it's, there's the breakthroughs are not going to be nearly as revolutionary as, like, say, some of the things that they do with things like aerodynamics and the crash
Sure.
structures and things like that.
So with the open source, could say Maserati or Ford go out and say, "Hey, that's a great design," and implement that into their design, or is that something that they'd have to pay the individual teams a certain amount of, say, royalty? How does that work?
That, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't know. I know that all of the F1 teams will have
Sure.
access to it, but I would assume that there's nothing saying
Yeah,
that,
it's open.
because it is open source there, that a road car manufacturer, there's nothing that says that, the Aston, for example, like the Aston Martin F1 team can't give that same design to their road car division, and then the
Yeah,
road car division can say, hey, Maserati, we've got this open
right.
source design, here you go, if
Yeah,
you want to use it, or Ford or any other
yeah,
manufacturer. So I would
right.
assume, it falls under the same standard, open source regulations, or licensing as, open source software.
Right, right, right. That's where I was going with that, because there's been uh so many inventions in F1 that have made it down to the public sector or non F1 series, that I was wondering exactly how that would work. And open source obviously would be one part of that, right?
Yeah. So I would assume that, by being on a designated server that's
Hmm.
governed by the FIA, that I would say that those parts and that information is freely available to
That's
anyone
cool.
who wants to take a look at it.
Yeah, very nice.
All right, so that's our tech corner for the week.
I
So
like
tell
that
us
one.
what you think. Were we completely off base on something? Do you have some kind of insight that maybe we missed? Let us know in the comments down below. So, all right, so let's move on to our news section for this week. So, first off, we were talking about Haas, buying a big chunk of their components from Ferrari, but Haas also had some other announcements this week. For one thing, they have now signed some very lucrative sponsorship deals, and starting with the 2025 season, Gene Haas, the team owner, is no longer having to subsidize the team's operation costs out of his own pocket. So for the last decade
Yeah.
that Haas has been operating, Gene Haas has been paying a huge amount of the bills out of his own pocket or out of the pocket of his
Yeah.
automation company. But now that is no longer the case. And Haas has also said that they are going to start being able to operate at the budget cap. So for the last several
Nice.
years, since the budget cap came into
Yeah.
place, they've been operating well under
Yeah.
the budget cap.
Right.
And now they are actually going to be scraping up against the
That is
budget cap
awesome.
amount, which I think is an awesome thing.
Yeah. I'm super excited because that's just going to, just like what you're saying before, it's going to really help level out the expenses and everything that they can do from an innovation standpoint. So it'll be exciting this year what they're, and God, with Behrman in the driver's seat too. Oh, it's going to be an exciting year.
But not only that, it's also going to have the knock-on effect as we were talking about the transferable components and things
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
that because they're having to buy those parts from Ferrari, and I guarantee you Ferrari is selling it above cost. They're making money
Oh,
off of it. And to
yeah.
be able to start having that extra money available, they can start saying, okay, well, we're going to focus on the front suspension, or just as an example or something like that, and say, okay, we're going to focus on this one area of the car, and we're actually going to bring that in house, and that'll actually, even with the hiring of people, and the
Mhm.
ramp up time, it's still going to end up saving the money in the long run, because now that they have those extra funds available to them, they can start bringing more and more of that stuff in house, which will give
Yeah,
them the cost savings, but also allow them to take and start closing that competitive gap between them and the front running teams.
yeah, nice.
So the other thing that we saw is that Haas also took and did their shakedown run this week, and apparently the Ocon actually did some damage to the car during the shakedown run. So there was some pictures that were floating around the internet. So it's already all already, we saw, not as many crashes out of Haas last season as we
Mhm.
had in previous seasons, but still, that's not a great, real auspicious start for Haas for to start off the
But
season.
I don't know. As you know, I'm not the biggest Ocon fan, but with that being said, I mean, just like what we were saying about Lewis 2 weeks ago, he being Ocon, has to really push the boundaries of that car to see what the edges are. So him crashing out in it, this is all preseason, this is all testing. I'm not too worried about that. Now, when it gets to actual testing, pre-test, preseason testing, and he's crushing out there, that's where we need to, put some, how about some yellow flags up
Mm-hmm.
and really start to question what's going on. But right now, man, he needs to do everything he can to find those edges.
Yes, absolutely, without a doubt. Especially because he's good, like you said, he's going to have Beerman
Mm.
breathing down his
Yeah,
neck, because
you
Beerman,
know it. Yeah,
as we've already seen, he is not going to back down. He is up for the
no,
challenge, as we
yep,
saw in the two races that he got to do for Haas last year, and his one off race with Ferrari. As sub duty for Signs. Bierman is not to be, trifled with. He is
yeah.
going to be pushing from. He's going to be pushing from the moment he straps himself into the 25 car
Well, the
at,
thing is, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, the thing is, Behrman does not have his sights on just being an F1. He has a sight on not only being a champion, but for racing with Ferrari. He's not
Mm-hmm.
going to be there being a nice person. He has to be very aggressive. Oh, getting the elbows out and being very aggressive, which will
Yep.
be very interesting to see how he races up against Ocon, who does the exact same thing. He's very aggressive. So
Yes.
it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a very interesting year.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. It's going to be fun to watch. And I guarantee you there will be some fireworks.
Oh, undoubtedly so.
All right. So, in other news, we also had McLaren was actually the first challenger for this year who actually broke cover. So they took and they did a shakedown run late last week at Silverstone, where they came out with a really cool, albeit they've said that it's not going to be any kind of special livery or anything, but they had a special papaya and black
Yeah.
camo livery that they put on the car in order to kind of hide, some because they said that they've been very aggressive with the aerodynamics over the offseason and that they've said that they've made, some huge strides in the aerodynamic efficiency of the car and they wanted to keep those under wraps. So they took and had a camo wrap that they took and they put over the car. But it was pretty striking. And I'm not gonna lie that even though I'm not the biggest fan of camo,
Yeah.
and I gotta say it was pretty cool looking and I wouldn't, be totally, put off if they were to use it maybe as a one off, or two off, livery during the
Yeah.
season.
No, I thought it was that cool. I think that um I think you're right. I think that I'm not the biggest fan of the camo look unless, obviously you're out hunting or something like that, but your day-to-day wear, maybe not so much. But this one was kind of cool.
It was. It was kind of yeah, it was kind of a cool like digital camo. So I thought it was very, very cool.
Yeah, I agree.
So, all right. And then in addition, Williams also broke cover on Valentine's Day at Silverstone as well
Mhm.
to take and show off their 2025 Challenger. But unlike McLaren, who did, their quote unquote camo effect in order to hide,
Hide it, yeah.
hide some of the innovations that they've done, Williams basically used their livery from last season. And, as we talked about last week, all of the teams right now, as they're breaking cover, at least was all the ones up to today. We're recording this on Tuesday, February the 18th. And today, the F1 actually had their F1 live unveiling event where all of the teams unveiled their liveries for 2025 at a special event at the O2 Arena today, which we will talk about next week after Corey and I have had a chance to take and dive into it and really dissect everything that went on during the live event. But all of the cars that we've seen break wraps up to this point have either, in the case of McLaren, has had the camo, or in the case of Williams and Haas, they used last year's liveries. So, it's there was quite a few noticeable differences between the 2025 Williams and the 2024 Williams that we'll get into more in the coming weeks when we start talking about the various about the various innovations that some of the teams have come up with over the off season.
Right. Yeah, yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what exactly McLaren has come out with because they want that title. Norris wants the title, obviously. Piastri would love the title as well, and they want to keep that constructors. So it'll be very interesting to see.
So, in other news along those same fronts, Adrian Newey, who, as we all well know, is basically on garden break right now and will be joining Aston Martin. I believe it's in March or April of this year as a full-time member, and he will start helping to develop, the continued development of the 2025 car, but really more specifically, the 2026 car with the massive rule changes that are coming online next year. Now, he made a very, very telling marks earlier this week, or actually, I'm sorry, late last week,
Yeah.
where he talked about the Red Bull and their disastrous floor upgrade that they brought to the car, and how the car really started to go backwards starting towards the end of the 2023 season and then throughout the 2024 season
Mhm.
until they got to the upgrade that they did at Brazil. And he says that he really does not see Red Bull
Yeah.
coming out of the gate even remotely as strongly as they have the last two seasons. He seems to think that McLaren, or I'm sorry, not McLaren, but he really seems to think that Red Bull is actually going to take a pretty considerable step back from where they've been the last couple seasons. And coming from the guy who designed those very, very competitive cars, that's kind of telling you something.
Yeah. Yeah, we've talked about this on several podcasts as well, but without Newey there, I just I don't see how they're going to overcome the challenges that they saw last year. I mean, truly, if it wasn't for as good of a driver as Max is, he would not have gotten that drivers championship at all. It's purely because the other teams were so far behind in the beginning of the year, and then towards the end of the year, it's just purely based on his driving ability. Because that car in anybody else's hands, I mean, well, again, look at Checo. Argue as you may, he's not the greatest driver, but by no stretch is he a horrible driver. With that being said, he never did really well in that car. And I don't necessarily believe it was 100% him. I think maybe, looking at it, maybe 40% would be purely on Checo, maybe a little bit, 45, whatever. But large portion of that, a large portion of that, I really think was the car. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Scott.
No, I mean that's what I was, I was gesturing is that I would say that it was even less
Yeah,
of the
Checo.
problems were on Checo and more of it was on the car. It's just that through the absolute, brilliance, and as we've, thrown the term around, once in a generational talent,
Yeah,
the car didn't suit Max. Max hated the car,
yeah,
but he kept quiet and he was still able to do great things with the car that masked its deficiencies,
right.
but they were deficiencies that Checo couldn't overcome. So I would
Yeah.
say it was probably 30% of less of Checo's woes were on Checo, and it was more about the fact that the car was just
Yeah.
dreadful.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
And this,
know,
the bad thing that I think about this is Liam Lawson. So he's coming into this new season, and Red Bull is going to still have their very high expectations of their car, but it's not going to be Liam's fault necessarily. It's going to be a lot of the car. But, again, you're going to contrast that against Max. Max knows how to overcome some of these deficiencies. It's not going to be really the driver, it's going to be the car. And I think that, unfortunately, if that holds true, I hope this isn't the case, but I really see Liam Lawson basically taking some of the blame on the car's deficiencies versus Red Bull owning up to it. What say
I
you?
think that that's going to be very much the case. Is I think that it's going to be, a lot of because Max is going to be able to take, and through his brilliance, he's going to be able to
Yeah,
take and mask a lot of those deficiencies that Liam, in his inexperience, is not. And that's why I said I really don't see. I went out on a limb last week, but I'm still holding to it. My first prediction of the season is that Liam Lawson will not finish the season in a Red Bull.
yeah, because again, it's not going to be. I think that part of it will be because of his inexperience. He's not going to really fully understand, how to communicate to the engineers and designers. But and also obviously the stress of being part of the Red Bull team. But a large part of that is going to be the management not wanting to take responsibility for a bad car and a bad design.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we also got the news that I really so far that because we talked a little bit at the end of last season the fact that two really good drivers in Valtteri Bottas and Joe Granu were both forced out at Sauber at the end of last season to make way for you know Hulkenberg, who is, who Audi really wanted, so that when they take over full control of the team, they have their guy, and then also in, their rookie, but it was really heartening to see that both Valtteri Bottas and Joe Granu are now going to be able to take and keep their place, at least be adjacent to Formula One, and the
Right.
fact that Bottas has returned as a reserve driver, a reserve and test driver for Mercedes, and Joe is returning home to the Ferrari fold as a test and reserve driver.
Yeah.
So, for those of you who didn't already know, Joe actually was part of the Ferrari Academy, and that's what helped facilitate his move to what was then called Alfa Romeo, because they were using Ferrari power units to team up with Bottas. And so now that no longer has a full-time seat, but at least he's going to be able to take and stay current with the current, Ferrari machinery. So he's going to still be able to stay, adjacent to Formula One and be at the ready in case, something happens and he's needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's a great thing for Joe.
Yeah. Again, it's just a bad sign for me, at least, that Botox doesn't have a seat. I just, I truly think that they're working on something behind the scenes, and hopefully we'll see him in 2026.
Okay, so we also got the news that F1 is considering at least one additional mandatory
Right.
pit stop at Monaco. So there would be at least, or I believe they're right now they're looking at requiring at least two pit stops,
Yeah.
because as everybody knows, that there is a rule from Formula One and the FIA that because of the single tire manufacturer in Pirelli, the teams must use at least two different compounds during a race, which means that it mandates that there has to be at minimum at least one pit stop during a race. And at Monaco, it's usually been a single pit stop just to make that tire change between compounds. Now they are looking, in order to improve the racing, they are looking at adding an additional mandatory pit stop at Monaco, which I think is, we talked about this after the snooze fest that we had this last season at Monaco, where the top 10 drivers finished in the exact same order in which they started. And it was basically a processional race that was boring as all snot to watch. That I think that, I don't think that adding an extra pit stop is going to completely resolve the issue, but I definitely think it's a step in the right direction. What say you, Corey?
Hopefully, some undercuts, overcuts, uh, anything else other than what we had the last couple of years, where wherever you placed in pole or in the qualifying, I should say, that's pretty much your race.
Yep. And I think that, by mandating a second pit stop at Monaco, I think that also I saw, different things, but I think that probably one of the best ideas is they also should mandate that you should have to use all three tire
Oh, that's a good
compounds,
one. Yeah.
so that way, like you were talking about the strategy thing. So it's like, okay, so maybe you're further back in the field, so you start on a softer on the softer compound, go a short stint, and try to really take advantage of the undercut, by starting on the softs, and then maybe going to the mediums for the middle section, and then having the mediums there, your compound, to take and try to help improve your position. And in the
Mhm.
reverse, if you qualify really well, maybe you start on the hards and work your way down the range through the mediums, through the middle section of the race, and then have the softs there available, in case you want to take, might want to make that overtake or something like that, where
Yeah.
you're really, you're duking it out with somebody. So I think that by making those changes, especially for Monaco, which is so tight, which is so notoriously hard to pass on,
Yeah.
I think that that's really going to be hopefully is going to dramatically improve the racing.
Yeah. Like you said, all those that you said, I really, they can't hurt at this point. I mean, it
No,
can't make it any more boring. How about
no, absolutely.
that?
And I also think that, like I said, the rules apply, where they have to use multiple different compounds during the race, only applies to the dry. If the race is, if there's race is any point has rain, whether it starts or finishes or it's only in the middle. Once they go to the intermediate or wet compound, the different compounds basically go out the window. But the one thing that I saw was said that even if their rain comes into effect for the race at Monaco, that they would still be required to do the 2 stops regardless of of the weather and everything. So even if it's 2 stops for intermediates or 2 stops for wets or whatever, they're still going to have those 2 mandatory stops, which I think is again, it's only going to help the competitive balance across the field as far as I'm concerned.
Like I said, it can't make it worse.
No, absolutely not. All right, so we also got the news this week, or actually, I'm sorry, it was last week, that Kimi Antonelli, who is now taking over Lewis Hamilton's seat at Mercedes at the tender age of 18, has passed his driving test in Italy. So he not only can he take and drive at 200 miles an hour on Monza, but now he can actually get in a road car and drive away from Monza at the end of the day. But we also got
no
the
Uber
news
for him.
yes, so good for him. That now he can legally drive. Not only can he drive, at 212 miles an hour on in a Formula One car at the pinnacle of the sport, but now he can also take and go out, and Ferrari can actually give him a company car, and he can legally drive it. But we also got the news that Ollie Berman, who is driving for Haas this season, who we talked about a little bit earlier, he confessed that he actually failed his road driving test on the first attempt.
It was parallel parking, wasn't it?
No, actually, believe it or not, he actually rolled through a stop sign, and that's what caused him to fail. And as he said, we don't have stop signs on race courses.
Yeah, exactly.
He says, it's like he said,
stop.
I made the mistake of not taking any kind of road driving lessons. And so therefore I just kind of rolled through the stop sign, which caused me to fail.
That's hilarious.
but fortunately on his second attempt, he took some lessons, got, a little better and passed it on his second attempt. So,
awesome.
Good on Ollie.
Yeah.
All right, so we got the news this week that Charles Leclerc actually got dibs on the 2025 car. So the team actually, because Charles's, years of service and everything, he's actually going to get the first crack at the shakedown of the 2025 Ferrari over Lewis Hamilton. And I think this is a good thing, on a number of respects, but I want to hear what you have to say first.
It's good because it's still showing that even though you have a powerhouse of Hamilton, they're still backing their number one, and he's still looked on as the number one. He's not been replaced by, it'd be very easy for a lot of people to say, well, he's Hamilton, so of course he's replacing me. But it's really good to see that they still have that support of Leclerc behind him versus just basically shoving him off in the background. So I really applaud that.
I do too, and that's exactly what I was going to say. So you took the words right out of my mouth. And Lewis has been around long enough that he knows, he's not one of these kind of guys that is going to have to be me all the time. And I'm sure that he was like, no, Charles deserves to get first crack at the car and let him have it. And that's the kind of person that Lewis is. So I don't see
100%.
any problems with it at all at Lewis getting the car later in the afternoon or the next day.
Right.
So we also got news this week that Audi is going to now be the title sponsor of Sky Sports F1 coverage, which I thought was really cool. That's showing that Audi has really, not just by buying the Sauber team and, becoming a power unit manufacturer, in 2026, but they are fully behind their Formula One efforts and trying to raise their profile through the sport of Formula One.
Yeah. They replaced Rolex, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, very good on them.
Excellent.
You don't want to, make your sponsor mad, especially somebody that's sponsoring so much money, because that's not cheap.
But, that does bring into question, though, will they be willing to criticize Audi once they, take over, fully take over the day-to-day
Yeah.
operations of Sauber, and they're producing their own
Right.
power units. If the first couple races, the power units blow up and everything because they are pushing so hard,
Yeah.
is Sky Sports going to be willing to
Right.
criticize
objective.
them? And I'm hoping that they have it written in the contract that Sky Sports is still able to, keep their journalistic integrity, and they are able to sponsor, they are able to criticize them even though they are a sponsor.
Yep.
No, and hopefully Audi has a thick enough skin that if they can take that criticism, they can say, hey, we sponsor it, but we can take the criticism because we are in this sport to compete and we are trying our best, which sometimes you have to, step over that edge in order to find the edge. Occasionally you have to step over it.
Yep, exactly.
All right. And then our last item for today is kind of not a Formula One news, but I thought it was really, really cool. And, I had to bring it up that we are actually, it looks like in 2026, we are going to get a Ford v Ferrari Part 2, in the fact that Ferrari has already been, competing at Le Mans and in the World Endurance Championship in the hypercar division for the last 2 seasons, and famously won the Le Mans 24 hours the last 2 seasons. But Ford has announced that they are returning to Le Mans in the hypercar category, and we are going to get a renewal of the Ford v Ferrari rivalry, which I think is just so freaking cool. I just can't wait.
Yeah. No Carroll Shelby this time, so we'll see how Ford stacks up this time. That'll be fun.
Yes. But, Farley, who is the head of the CEO at Ford, he is a racer at heart. He has never made any bones about the fact that he is a racer at heart. He thinks that Ford being in competing in motorsports is absolutely critical to Ford's success. And so I think that it's Ford's not going to come in half-assed. They're going to come to compete. They did it with the Dark Horse Mustang competing in the GT3 class, and so now they're going to bring that same kind of passion to the World Endurance Championship in the hypercar division as well.
Awesome. Can't wait.
So ends another session and season of F1 Brake Check. Do us a favor. If you like what you hear, smash that subscribe button. If you think we can do something better, you think we can change something, you think we can do anything better for season 3, let us know in the comments. Join us next week when we start season 3 with the return to battle with preseason testing getting underway. So until next time, he's Corey, I'm Scott, we are the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.